He thought it was just a rescue, a stranger trapped in the storm, but when she wakes up, she's no stranger at all. She's the one at the top of the very company that took away his job and his family's security. Now, trapped together in the heart of the storm, an even bigger battle is brewing because behind closed boardroom doors, someone wants him silenced. What hidden truths could bring a powerful corporation to its knees? And when the blizzard clears, will saving her life be the one thing that destroys his? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through sheets of swirling snow, Eli Carter squinted at the road ahead. His old pickup truck groaned against the wind as he guided it carefully along County Road 9. The space heaters in the truck bed rattled with each gust that slammed against the vehicle. Pastor Ruth had called an hour ago, desperate for more heating equipment at the church warming center before the storm got worse. Eli adjusted his worn army parka, grateful for its familiar warmth. The weathered garment had seen him through 3 deployments and countless Midwest winters since. He thought of Maya back home, probably lost in one of her detailed sketches at the kitchen table. She'd insisted she'd be fine alone for an hour, promising to check her blood sugar and keep her phone close. "Just be careful, Dad," she'd said, giving him that look that made her seem far older than 16. "The roads are getting nasty." She wasn't wrong. The blizzard had intensified in the last 20 minutes, transforming the familiar countryside into an alien landscape of white. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere yards, the afternoon sun a pale smear behind thick clouds. Eli leaned forward, straining to see through the windshield where his wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulation. That's when he caught it. A faint red glow through the curtain of white. Eli slowed the truck, peering harder. As he drew closer, the shape materialized. A black luxury sedan, its rear end jutting out at an awkward angle from a massive snowdrift. Hazard lights pulsed weakly, nearly obscured by ice building up on the taillights. "Lord have mercy," Eli muttered, pulling his truck onto the shoulder. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and zipped his parka up to his chin before stepping out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him sideways. Snow needles stung his exposed face as he trudged through knee-deep drifts toward the stranded vehicle. Through frosted windows, he could make out a single figure slumped over the steering wheel. Eli tried the driver's door handle, frozen solid. He pounded on the window, shouting, "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. The figure didn't move. His military training kicked in. Eli hurried back to his truck, retrieved the tire iron, and returned to the sedan. "Sorry about this," he said to no one in particular, then swung the metal tool against the passenger window. The safety glass spiderwebbed. Another blow shattered it inward. Reaching through the opening, Eli unlocked the driver's door and wrenched it open. A blast of cold air swirled around the unconscious woman. She was dressed for business, not winter survival. Just a wool coat over what looked like an expensive suit. Her skin had taken on a frightening pallor. Eli pressed 2 fingers against her neck, finding a pulse. Weak, but there. Her hands were ice cold when he checked them. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He patted her cheek gently, but she remained unresponsive. Working quickly, Eli ran back to his truck. From behind the seat, he pulled out the old quilt he kept for emergencies, a gift from his late wife, patched together from their daughter's baby clothes. Returning to the sedan, he carefully unbuckled the woman and assessed her position. No obvious injuries, but she'd clearly been here a while. "Stay with me, ma'am," he murmured, wrapping the quilt around her. With practiced care, he lifted her from the driver's seat. The wind howled around them as he carried her to his truck, her head lolling against his shoulder. Getting her into the passenger seat was awkward, but Eli managed it, making sure the quilt stayed tucked around her. He cranked up the heat full blast, directing the vents toward her. Snow pounded against the windshield as he put the truck in gear, executing a careful 3-point turn on the treacherous road. The church was closer than the hospital, and in this weather, it was their best option. Eli glanced at his unconscious passenger, noting her labored breathing. The quilt's familiar pattern of circus animals and alphabet blocks seemed incongruous against her tailored clothing. "Hang in there," he said, both to himself and to her, as he guided the truck through the strengthening storm. "We're gonna get you somewhere safe." The heavy church basement door groaned as Eli shouldered it open, cradling the unconscious woman wrapped in his old quilt. Warmth and the rich aroma of coffee and simmering chili washed over him, a stark contrast to the bitter cold he'd just left behind. Christmas lights strung along the walls cast a soft glow over the room, where dozens of cots had been set up in neat rows. "Over here!" Pastor Ruth called out, her silver hair catching the light as she hurried toward them. She gestured to an empty cot near one of the space heaters. "Bring her this way." Eli's boots squeaked against the linoleum floor as he carried his burden across the room. Other volunteers paused in their tasks, watching with concern as he gently laid the woman down. Her face was still pale, but some color had returned to her cheeks during the drive. "What happened?" Pastor Ruth asked, already checking the woman's pulse with practiced efficiency. Despite being in her 60s, she moved with the energy of someone much younger. "Found her car buried in a drift on County Road 9, Eli explained, shrugging off his snow-covered parka. "Engine was dead. She was unconscious when I got to her." He ran a hand through his graying hair, scattering melting snowflakes. "Had to break her window to get her out." Pastor Ruth nodded, tucking another blanket around the woman. "Sarah, bring us some hot water bottles," she called to a teenage volunteer. "And Tom, we could use more coffee over here." The basement hummed with activity. A portable radio crackled with weather updates while volunteers distributed steaming cups of coffee and bowls of chili to the dozen or so townspeople who had sought shelter from the storm. The old radiators clanked and hissed, fighting against the cold that seeped through the foundation. "Her breathing's better?" Pastor Ruth observed, placing a hot water bottle near the woman's feet. "But we should have Dr. Martinez take a look when he gets here. He's trying to make it over from the clinic." Eli pulled up a folding chair, watching as color slowly returned to the woman's face. Despite her disheveled state, everything about her spoke of wealth, from her expertly styled silver hair to her tailored wool coat and expensive leather boots. She looked oddly familiar, but he couldn't place why. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. A small moan escaped her lips as she shifted on the cot. "Easy now," Pastor Ruth soothed, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're safe. You're at the First Methodist Church in Miller's Run." The woman's eyes opened fully, revealing sharp brown eyes that darted around in confusion. "What?" Her voice came out hoarse and weak. "What happened?" "Your car went off the road in the storm," Eli explained. "I found you unconscious and brought you here." She struggled to sit up, and Pastor Ruth quickly adjusted the pillows behind her. "The church warming center," the woman murmured, taking in her surroundings. "Of course." Her voice was stronger now, cultured and precise despite her ordeal. Tom appeared with a steaming cup of coffee, which Pastor Ruth took with a grateful smile. "Here," she said, helping the woman wrap her trembling fingers around the warm cup. "Small sips." The woman complied, and as she lifted her face to the light, Pastor Ruth suddenly went very still. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Vivian?" Pastor Ruth's voice was barely above a whisper. "Vivian Hale?" The woman, Vivian, lowered her coffee cup slowly. "Ruth? Ruth Brennan?" A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "It's been a long time." Eli felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. Vivian Hale. The name hit him like a physical blow. He knew why she had seemed familiar now. He'd seen her photo in newspaper articles and company newsletters. She wasn't just any executive. She was the chairwoman of Hale Holdings, the parent company that had bought out Midwest Logistics 3 months ago. The same company that had laid off half the workforce, himself included, right before Christmas. Vivian seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. Her eyes met Eli's, and he saw the moment understanding dawned in them. She straightened slightly, her corporate mask sliding into place despite her disheveled appearance. "I suppose I owe you my thanks, mister." "Carter," he said stiffly. "Eli Carter." Recognition flickered in her eyes. Of course, his name would have been on countless documents during the layoffs, another number in a spreadsheet somewhere. The wind howled outside, rattling the basement windows. The sound filled the awkward silence that stretched between them. Pastor Ruth glanced from one to the other, clearly sensing the tension but unsure of its source. Vivian's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "Mr. Carter, But whatever she was about to say was cut off by another gust of wind that made the old building creak and groan. They both turned toward the sound, then back to each other. Their eyes met across the space between them, the truth of their connection hanging in the air as heavy as the storm clouds outside. The evening crept on as the blizzard raged outside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the church basement, casting a harsh glow that the Christmas lights tried their best to soften. Vivian Hale sat on her cot, wrapped in the thick quilts the volunteers had provided. Her hands, no longer blue with cold, curled around a steaming cup of coffee. The rich aroma helped chase away the last lingering effects of her brush with disaster. She watched Eli Carter move among the other storm refugees, helping serve bowls of chili and checking on elderly folks who needed extra blankets. His quiet strength reminded her of her own father, the same careful way of moving, the same watchful eyes that missed nothing. When he passed near her cot again, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was stronger now, though still rougher than her usual polished tone. "Would you sit with me for a moment? I'd like to properly thank you." Eli hesitated, then pulled up the metal folding chair. He sat with the careful dignity she'd noticed earlier, his weathered hands resting on his knees. Up close, she could see the worry lines around his eyes, the slight sag of tired shoulders under his flannel shirt. "You saved my life out there," Vivian said, taking another sip of coffee. "I need to know who to thank. Tell me about yourself, your family." A shadow crossed his face, but his voice remained steady. "Not much to tell. It's just me and my daughter Maya now. She's 16. "Just the two of you?" Vivian prompted gently. "My wife Sarah passed 6 years ago. Cancer." He said it simply, but Vivian saw how his hands tightened slightly on his knees. "Maya's all I've got. She's a good kid. Smart, artistic, wants to study graphic design in college." Vivian nodded, noticing how his face softened when he spoke of his daughter. "That's wonderful. Is she able to take art classes at school?" A flicker of something, pride mixed with pain, crossed Eli's features. "She was. Had to drop the advanced placement course this semester. Money's been tight since the layoff at Hale Midwest Logistics." The words landed like stones between them. Vivian set her coffee cup down carefully. "You worked at our logistics center?" 15 years. Led the forklift crew, had a perfect safety record. His voice remained level, but there was steel beneath it now. "Until 3 months ago, when the operational restructuring came down." Vivian felt the weight of those words, of the decisions made in boardrooms far from this basement. "The layoffs were strictly business decisions, Mr. Carter, based on operational metrics and market projections. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal," Eli echoed. He looked around the basement, at the other faces she now realized might be former employees. "Tell that to Jim over there, who's choosing between heat and heart medication. Or Anna, who's about to lose her house. Or my Maya, who—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. Vivian leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, I want you to know, I'll look into your case personally. There may have been oversights in how the restructuring was implemented." "Don't need charity, Mrs. Hale." His voice was quiet but firm. "Just needed the job I earned." "It's not charity to correct a mistake," she replied. "At least let me review your file. And in the meantime," she reached for her purse, pulled out her checkbook. "The church's heating bill for the winter. Consider it a thank you to the community." Pastor Ruth approached just then, carrying fresh coffee. Her eyes widened at the check Vivian was writing, but she accepted it with quiet grace. "This is very generous, Mrs. Hale. It will help many people." From somewhere upstairs, organ music drifted down. The evening service was starting, and the familiar notes of Amazing Grace filtered through the ceiling. Several of the shelter residents began humming along. "Let me show you to the dinner table," Eli said, standing. "They're serving the hot food over there." He offered his arm, steady and strong, to help her up. Vivian rose, still wrapped in the quilt, and let him guide her to a corner table. The hymn continued overhead, its message of redemption floating down through the wooden beams. She watched Eli's back as he walked away, his steps measured and dignified despite everything. The gratitude she felt for her rescue warred with the knowledge that her company's decisions had hurt this man, this community. The chili was hot and homemade, steam rising from the bowl someone placed before her. Around her, other storm refugees talked quietly, their conversations punctuated by the wind howling outside and the gentle strains of hymns from above. Eli had moved to help serve others, his face a careful mask that revealed neither bitterness nor acceptance of her offers. Morning light filtered weakly through the church's basement windows, dulled by the endless curtain of snow still falling outside. The storm had settled in like an unwanted houseguest, showing no signs of leaving. Eli's muscles ached from sleeping in the folding chair, but he kept moving, helping to stack chairs and tidy up after breakfast. The smell of coffee still hung in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of industrial floor cleaner. Somewhere in the building, a heating vent rattled and clanked. Around him, other storm refugees were rolling up sleeping bags and gathering their belongings, though everyone knew they weren't going anywhere soon. Eli lifted another metal chair, its legs scraping against the linoleum. These chairs had seen better days, probably as old as his first Sunday school class here. As he added it to the growing stack, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it, but something made him pause. The text was from Anna Reyes. He hadn't heard from her since the layoffs 3 months ago. Anna had always been different from the other HR folks at Hale Midwest Logistics. She actually seemed to care about the workers, not just the bottom line. "Need to talk," her message read. "Important. About your termination." Eli glanced around the basement. Vivian Hale stood near the coffee station, deep in conversation with Pastor Ruth. She'd changed into borrowed clothes, someone's spare sweater and jeans that made her look almost ordinary, though she still carried herself like someone used to being in charge. His phone buzzed again. "Can you step away to talk?" Eli typed back. "At church shelter. Storm's bad. What's up?" The response came quickly. "Found something in your file. That safety report you filed after Tommy's near miss with the forklift?" Eli's hands tightened around his phone. He remembered that day clearly. Tommy Harris, new on the job, had almost been crushed when a poorly maintained forklift's brakes failed. Eli had insisted on filing the report, even when his supervisor hinted it would be better to handle it internally. Anna's next message made his stomach drop. "Report was flagged. Week later, your name showed up on contractor blacklist. Same day as termination notice." The basement suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Eli walked to a quiet corner, away from the bustling volunteers and scattered conversations. His fingers hovered over the phone's keyboard, but before he could respond, Anna sent another message. Contractors' safety violations would have cost millions to fix. Cheaper to discredit whistleblowers. The words burned on the screen. Eli looked up at Vivian again. She was smiling at something Pastor Ruth had said, her hand wrapped around a coffee mug decorated with faded Christmas trees. Did she know? Was she part of it? "Who else knows about this?" he typed. "Just found the connection. Had to dig deep. Be careful who you tell." Eli slipped the phone back into his pocket, his mind racing. The layoffs hadn't just been operational decisions like Vivian claimed. Someone had deliberately targeted him, buried his safety concerns, and made sure he couldn't work in logistics again. No wonder his job applications had gone nowhere. Across the room, Pastor Ruth's warm laugh carried over the general murmur. She and Vivian were looking at old church photos on the bulletin board, their heads bent together like old friends. The scene felt surreal now, the powerful CEO playing at being ordinary, while somewhere in her company's computers sat proof that they'd destroyed his livelihood for doing the right thing. His phone buzzed one final time. "Watch your back. Some higher-ups very invested in keeping this quiet." The basement walls seemed to close in. Eli needed air, needed space to think. He headed for the side door, passing the chair stack he'd been working on. The metal seats gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting his distorted image as he walked by. The door opened with a blast of Arctic air. Outside, the snow was still coming down in thick curtains, the wind driving it sideways. The cold hit his face like a slap, but it helped clear his head. He stood there in the doorway, phone heavy in his pocket, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air. Through the swirling snow, he could barely make out his truck in the parking lot, now just a white mound with familiar shapes. Yesterday, he'd pulled Vivian Hale from her expensive car and brought her to safety. Today, he knew her company had deliberately wrecked his life for trying to protect his coworkers. The door creaked behind him as someone else stepped out for air. Eli stayed where he was, phone clutched in his hand, caught between anger and uncertainty. The truth sat like ice in his stomach, but what could he do with it? Confront Vivian now, in front of everyone? Wait and gather more proof? The snow continued its relentless fall, offering no answers. The afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds, turning the blanket of snow into a blinding white expanse. Outside the church, a small group of volunteers worked to dig out the remaining vehicles. Their shovels scraped against pavement in a steady rhythm, creating paths through the deep drifts. Vivian's black SUV emerged from its snowy cocoon as the last clumps of packed snow fell away. She stood nearby in her now dry designer clothes, looking somewhat out of place among the volunteers in their worn winter gear. Her eyes kept drifting to Eli as he helped clear the final patches of ice from around her tires. "Mr. Carter," she called out, her breath visible in the cold air. "Please, let me give you a ride home. It's the least I can do after yesterday." Eli paused, leaning on his shovel. The offer was tempting. His old pickup had a finicky heater, and the temperature was still well below freezing. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. That's kind of you." As they settled into the leather seats of her heated SUV, the contrast between their worlds couldn't have been starker. The vehicle probably cost more than Eli made in 3 years at the plant. The dashboard gleamed with high-tech displays, and the engine purred so quietly he could barely hear it. "Take a left at the light," Eli directed, trying to ignore how uncomfortable the luxury made him feel. Then straight down Oak Street. They had barely made it 2 blocks when Eli's phone rang. Maya's ringtone, the one she'd specially picked, some pop song he could never remember the name of. His daughter never called during school hours unless something was wrong. "Maya, what's wrong, honey?" The tremor in his voice made Vivian glance over with concern. Maya's voice came through, thick with tears. "Dad, my pump's not working right. It keeps giving me error messages, and I already had to correct my sugar twice this morning." She tried to sound calm, but he could hear the fear underneath. "Ms. Peterson says I should go home." Eli's heart clenched. The insulin pump was Maya's lifeline. They'd fought hard with insurance to get it approved 2 years ago. "I'm on my way, sweetheart. Hang in there, okay? Use your backup pin if you need to." He looked at Vivian. "I hate to ask, but—" "Of course," she said immediately, already turning toward the high school. "Just tell me where." They found Maya in the nurse's office, her face pale but composed. She managed a weak smile when she saw her father, though her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Vivian Hale behind him. The school nurse, Ms. Peterson, approached with a worried expression. "The pump keeps alarming," she explained, showing Eli the error messages on the small screen. "I've seen this before. Usually means the unit is failing. She'll need to see her endocrinologist right away." Eli's mind raced through calculations. Their insurance had lapsed after the layoff. He'd been stretching Maya's insulin supplies through a discount program, but a new pump? His stomach churned at the thought of what that might cost. 20 minutes later, they sat in Dr. Chin's office, listening as she confirmed their fears. The pump was indeed failing, a known issue with this model. Maya sat very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We need to replace it within the next 10 days, Dr. Chin explained gently. "After that, the malfunction risk becomes too high." She glanced at her computer screen. "Without insurance, the upfront cost would be $6,200. There are some payment plans available." The number hit Eli like a physical blow. He could feel Maya tense beside him, knowing all too well their financial situation. "I can help," Vivian spoke up from her chair in the corner. She'd insisted on driving them to the appointment, and now she reached for her purse. "Please, let me." "No." Eli's voice was firm but quiet. "Thank you, Miss Hale, but no." He couldn't take charity from the woman whose company had put him in this position, no matter how well-intentioned the offer. The drive home was silent. Vivian tried once more to offer assistance, but Eli's polite refusal was final. She dropped them off with her business card and a plea to call if he changed his mind. Inside their small house, Maya immediately went to check her backup supplies, while Eli sank into a kitchen chair. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the stack of bills he'd been avoiding. He pulled them closer, along with the calculator he kept nearby these days. The numbers hadn't gotten any friendlier since the last time he'd looked at them. Mortgage payment due next week. Utilities he'd managed to keep current, but just barely. The credit card he'd been using for Maya's medical supplies was nearly maxed out. He could hear Maya in the living room, the scratch of her pencil as she worked on homework. She was trying so hard to act like everything was normal, to not be a burden. The thought made his chest ache. His daughter shouldn't have to worry about being a burden at 16. The calculator's display mocked him as he punched in numbers, trying to find $6,200 that didn't exist. Even if he sold his truck, it wouldn't be enough. The piano in the living room, Sarah's piano, might bring in something, but the thought of selling it made him feel sick. It was one of the last pieces of Maya's mother they had left. Maya's pencil scratched steadily in the next room, the sound somehow both comforting and heartbreaking. She was doing her best to be strong, just like always, just like her mother would have. Eli stared at the bills spread across the table, at the calculator's unforgiving display, as the afternoon sun continued its slow march across the kitchen floor. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Eli sat at the worn wooden table, His daughter's medical paperwork spread out before him like a complicated puzzle he couldn't solve. The numbers refused to add up no matter how many times he moved them around. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten during an hour of calculating and recalculating. Maya's insulin pump would cost more than 3 months' rent. The thought made his stomach twist into knots. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Eli glanced at the unfamiliar number, almost letting it go to voicemail. On the fourth ring, he answered, "Mr. Carter, this is Vivian Hale." Eli sat up straighter, as if she could see him through the phone. "Yes, ma'am. I've been thinking about your situation," she said, her voice carrying that polished tone of someone used to making business proposals. "And I have a proposition that might benefit us both." Eli's grip tightened on the phone. "I meant what I said about not wanting charity." "This isn't charity," Vivian replied quickly. "It's a business opportunity. We need someone who knows the ground truth about the plant closure's impact on the community, someone who can conduct an honest audit." The kitchen seemed to grow very still. Through the doorway, Eli could see Maya's schoolbooks scattered across the living room coffee table, her insulin kit placed carefully beside them. "An audit?" he asked. "Yes, a short-term consulting position. 6 weeks, fair pay, looking into how the closure affected workers and their families. We need to understand the real human cost of these decisions." Eli ran a hand over his face, thinking. The timing and the amount would likely cover Maya's pump. But something in him still hesitated. "Why me?" he asked. "There are plenty of people with more experience in corporate analysis." "Because you know these people, Mr. Carter. They trust you. And after what Anna told you about the safety complaint, I think you understand why we need someone who won't sugarcoat the truth." Eli's eyebrows rose. "You know about that? I made some calls after our conversation. What happened to you wasn't right. This is a chance to bring everything into the light, if you're willing." He stood up, pacing the kitchen's worn linoleum. The furnace kicked on with a rumble, sending warm air through the vents. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I have conditions." "Go on." "Complete transparency. No buried reports, no massage numbers. Whatever we find, good or bad, goes in the final document." "Agreed. And I want access to all the relevant data. Hiring practices, termination records, everything." "That's reasonable," Vivian said, "though some of it may require confidentiality agreements." "Fine, as long as the findings can be public." Eli paused, gathering his thoughts. "One more thing. I work independently. If someone tries to influence the results, I walk." "You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Carter." There was something like respect in her voice. "But I accept your terms. Can you meet tomorrow morning to work out the details? Say, 9 o'clock at the church?" Pastor Ruth offered her office. "I'll be there." Eli glanced at the medical forms on the table. "And Ms. Hale, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Carter. I think we both know this company needs more of that." After they hung up, Eli stood for a long moment in the kitchen doorway, watching Maya work on her homework. Her dark hair fell forward as she concentrated, so much like her mother's, it made his heart ache. She looked up, catching him watching. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Yeah, honey." He crossed the room and kissed the top of her head. "Time for bed. It's getting late." Maya gathered her books and insulin kit, movements careful and practiced. In her bedroom, she sat cross-legged on her bed while Eli perched on the edge, their nightly routine unchanged since she was small. "We're gonna figure out the pump situation," he promised, pulling her blanket up. "I've got some work coming up that should help." "I know you will, Dad." She smiled, though he could see the worry she tried to hide. "You always figure things out." Outside her window, the storm had finally passed. The night sky showed through breaks in the clouds, stars glinting faintly through the frost on the glass. Eli touched Maya's cheek gently, remembering all the nights he'd sat beside this bed during sugar crashes and midnight insulin checks. "Get some sleep," he said softly. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad." The stars grew clearer as the clouds continued to part, their light reflecting off the fresh snow below. Eli stood at the window for a moment, watching the morning sunlight stream through the church hall's tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Eli arrived early, stomping snow from his boots on the welcome mat. The hall still held traces of warmth from yesterday's storm shelter, coffee rings on folding tables, a forgotten scarf draped over a chair. Lila Torres was already there, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She sat at a table near the front, surrounded by manila folders and steaming coffee. 23 years as union steward had taught her to always arrive first and leave last. "Morning, Carter," she said, not looking up from her papers. "Hope you know what you're getting into with this audit business." "Morning, Lila." Eli pulled up a chair. "Guess we'll find out." The heavy doors creaked open, and Vivian Hale stepped in, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit that seemed out of place among the plastic chairs and linoleum floors. She carried a leather-bound notepad and a tablet computer. "Good morning," she said, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached. "Thank you both for meeting so early." Lila's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Hale, been a while since we've seen management in these parts. Please call me Vivian." She settled into a chair, smoothing her slacks. "And you're right, it's been far too long." The first worker arrived just as they finished setting up. Jim Martinez, 30 years on the loading dock, now working part-time at the hardware store. His weathered hands twisted his wool cap as he spoke. "Applied to the new distribution center over in Riverside," he said. "Got told they're looking for fresh talent." "Fresh talent? I can still load a truck faster than any kid with a fancy degree." Vivian's pen moved steadily across her notepad. "Who told you that exactly?" "The hiring algorithm, if you can believe it." Jim's laugh was bitter. "Computer says I'm too old, too expensive to insure. Computer says my experience don't matter." More workers filtered in as the morning progressed. Sarah Chin, who'd missed her daughter's college graduation because she couldn't afford the plane ticket after losing her benefits. Robert Washington, whose military service gaps in employment somehow counted against him in the automated screening process. Lila kept detailed notes, occasionally sliding documents across to Eli. Performance reviews, safety records, commendations that seemed to have been forgotten when the layoffs came. "Notice a pattern?" she murmured, tapping a stack of rejection letters. "Anyone over 50? Anyone with health conditions? Anyone who ever filed a complaint?" All filtered out by that fancy new hiring system. Vivian's composed expression had begun to crack around the edges. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table as Tom Fisher, a 28-year veteran of the maintenance crew, described how his diabetes medication had become unaffordable without insurance. "My grandson's learning computers in school," Tom said, his voice rough. "Maybe he can explain to me how some program decides I'm not worth hiring anymore." The morning wore on, a steady stream of stories filling the church hall. Each one seemed to hit Vivian harder than the last. Her notepad was filled with tight, careful writing, but her knuckles had gone white around her pen. By early afternoon, the last interview finished. The hall felt heavier somehow, weighted down with dozens of lives disrupted, futures derailed. Lila gathered her files with practiced efficiency, but her movements were sharp, angry. "Well," she said, sliding the folders into her bag, "that's what it looks like from ground level, Mrs. Hale. Different view than from the executive floor, I expect." Vivian stood slowly, gathering her things. "Yes," she said quietly. "Very different." They stepped outside into the bitter cold. Across town, the mill stood silent against the gray sky, its windows dark, smokestacks empty. Snow had drifted against the chain-link fence surrounding the parking lot, and a "no trespassing" sign swung slowly in the wind. Vivian stopped at the bottom of the church steps, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She stared at the shuttered building, at the place where hundreds of lives had intersected for generations. Just stood there, looking, while her breath frosted in the winter morning. The scent of home cooking filled the church basement, a warm mix of casseroles, fresh rolls, and at least 3 different kinds of pie. Folding tables lined the walls, draped with checkered cloths and laden with dishes brought by families who'd worked at the mill for generations. Paper plates bent under the weight of comfort food, and styrofoam cups of coffee made rounds between weathered hands. Vivian Hale sat somewhat stiffly at one of the tables, looking slightly out of place in her tailored blazer among the flannel shirts and well-worn sweaters. She'd traded her usual business lunches for Dorothy Miller's chicken casserole, served with a hefty side of small-town scrutiny. Her fork moved carefully through the layers of chicken, cream sauce, and crispy topping as she listened to the conversations around her. "This is Dorothy's famous recipe," explained Martha Jenkins, a silver-haired woman who'd worked in accounting for 30 years. "Used to bring it to every mill potluck. Course, we haven't had one of those since the closure." Vivian nodded, swallowing a bite. "It's excellent. I can see why it's famous." "My Harold always said good food brings folks together," Martha continued, passing a basket of rolls. even when times are hard, maybe especially then. At the next table, Eli helped Maya fill her plate, watching his daughter navigate the crowd with practiced ease. She knew everyone, greeting retired workers by name, accepting hugs and questions about school with quiet grace. These people were more than former coworkers, they were extended family. The basement hummed with conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter and the clinking of plastic utensils. Pastor Ruth moved between tables, topping off coffee cups and making sure everyone had enough to eat. The atmosphere was warm despite the winter chill seeping through the old windows. Frank Cooper, who'd started at the mill in 1962, made his way to Vivian's table. His movements were slow but deliberate, one hand gripping a worn leather photo album. He eased himself into the chair beside her, joints creaking like old machinery. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice gravelly but strong. "Got something you ought to see." Vivian set down her fork, turning to give him her full attention. Frank opened the album with careful fingers, flipping through pages until he found what he was looking for. He slid out a framed photograph, its edges softened by decades of handling. The black and white image showed a group of workers standing proud in front of the mill's main entrance. Some wore hard hats, others in shirt sleeves, all wearing expressions of dignity and purpose. What stood out most was the diversity of faces, black, white, Hispanic, at a time when such integration was rare. "First integrated crew at Miller's Run," Frank explained, tapping the glass. 1968. That's my father there on the end. We were proud then, Mrs. Hale. Proud of what that mill stood for. Wasn't just about the work. It was about respect, dignity, giving folks a fair chance. Vivian's fingers traced the edge of the frame, her expression thoughtful. "What happened to that spirit?" "Got lost somewhere between the spreadsheets, I reckon." Frank's words carried no bitterness, just a weary sadness. "Numbers don't tell the whole story, ma'am. Never did." He pushed the photo toward her. "Keep it. Might help you remember what we built here and what we lost." Vivian hesitated, then carefully slipped the framed photo into her leather portfolio. The weight of it seemed heavier than its size would suggest. Across the room, Eli noticed the exchange while helping to clear empty plates. He watched as Vivian tucked away the photograph, her usual corporate polish, showing small cracks. For a moment, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone wrestling with uncomfortable truths. The evening wound down as the snow started falling again outside, fat flakes visible through the basement windows. Vivian gathered her things, nodding goodbye to the remaining guests. She paused at the stairs, one hand resting on the photo in her portfolio. Eli stood by the coffee station, Maya beside him washing dishes, as Vivian made her way to the exit. Through the window, he could see the snow beginning to coat the church steps. He watched her careful progress toward her car, wondering about the photograph tucked away in her bag and what it might mean to someone who seemed so far removed from the mill's history. The question hung in the air like the snow outside. Was this glimpse into the past enough to change how she saw the present? The warmth of the potluck still lingered in the basement, but winter's chill crept in as the door swung shut behind her. The morning sun barely penetrated the dusty window of the small back office where Eli sat hunched over a stack of papers. The space was cramped, with just enough room for a metal desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets that had seen better days. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over the scattered documents. Ana Reyes stood behind him, her HR badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. She pointed to columns of data on her laptop screen, her voice low despite being alone in the office. "Look at these application scores," she said, scrolling through spreadsheets. "The vendor system automatically ranks candidates before any human ever sees them." Eli rubbed his tired eyes, trying to make sense of the numbers. "Walk me through it." "Okay, take this applicant here." Ana highlighted a row. James Martinez, 20 years of experience operating forklifts. But the system marked him down because he lives in the East Side zip code. "The East Side?" Eli frowned. "That's where most of our laid-off workers live." "Exactly." Anna's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more examples. "The algorithm assumes that certain zip codes mean higher risk. It's basically redlining in digital form." The morning light caught the worry lines around Anna's eyes. She'd been with HR for 15 years, but Eli had never seen her look so troubled. "There's more," she continued, opening another file. "See these gaps in employment history? The system penalizes them automatically. So if someone took time off to care for a sick parent, or serve in the military. Like I did, Eli said quietly. Right. The computer sees that as a red flag. Anna's voice carried a hint of anger. No human consideration, just cold numbers. Eli stood up and paced the small space, his work boots scuffing against the worn carpet. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, that's all the room allowed. The walls seemed to close in as the implications became clear. Show me the veteran applications, he requested, returning to his chair. Anna pulled up another spreadsheet. Row after row of names, each marked with a lowered score. Men and women who'd served their country, now being quietly shut out by an algorithm that saw their service as a liability. The vendor promised this system would make hiring more efficient, Anna explained, her fingers drumming nervously on the desk. But efficient doesn't mean fair. Look at the age data. The numbers told a stark story. Applicants over 40 faced steadily declining scores, regardless of their qualifications. The computer didn't care about experience or loyalty. It just saw higher insurance costs and potential health issues. This isn't just about my layoff anymore, Eli said, studying the screen. This thing is keeping an entire community locked out. Anna nodded, glancing anxiously at the door. The vendor sold this to dozens of companies. They claim it removes human bias, but all it does is automate discrimination. Eli pulled out his notebook, the same one he'd been using to track layoff stories. His handwriting filled page after page, names, dates, broken promises. Now he added new notes. Zip code penalties, service gaps, age discrimination. Can you print these reports? He asked. Anna hesitated. I shouldn't even be showing you this. If anyone finds out. I understand the risk you're taking, Eli said softly, but people need to know the truth. She bit her lip, then hit the print button. The ancient printer in the corner wheezed to life, spitting out page after page of damning data. While they waited, Eli thought about Frank Cooper's photo from the potluck, that proud integrated crew from 1968. How many of their children and grandchildren had been silently rejected by this soulless algorithm? Here's something else, Anna said, opening one last file. The system gives bonus points for degrees from certain universities, but it downgrades community college certifications and trade school training. The exact kind of education most folks around here have, Eli noted, his jaw tightening. The printer finished its work. Anna gathered the warm pages, straightening them into a neat stack. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed them to Eli. Be careful with these, she warned. The vendor has strict confidentiality clauses. They could sue if they found out this data leaked. Eli tucked the papers into his folder. Thank you, Anna. I know what this could cost you. She managed a small smile. My parents came here with nothing, worked those factory floors so I could get an education. I can't just watch while some computer decides who deserves a chance. A knock on the door made them both jump. Anna quickly closed her laptop as Eli stood, his fists clenched at his sides. The folder felt heavy in his hands, weighted with truth and consequence. This wasn't just about getting his job back anymore. The whole system was rigged, and the evidence was right here in black and white. The evening painted the hotel's windows in shades of amber and purple as Vivian reviewed the audit findings in her suite. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. She wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, she found Brent Klein's tall figure filling the doorframe, his expensive suit as impeccable as his practiced smile. Vivian, we need to talk. She stepped aside, letting him enter. I didn't know you were in town, Brent. Word travels fast when the chairwoman goes rogue. He settled into a leather armchair, smoothing his tie. The board's concerned about this audit situation. The board? Vivian remained standing, arms crossed. Or you? Both. Brent's smile tightened. This crusade of yours is making people nervous. Digging up old files, questioning our vendor partnerships. It's destabilizing. What I'm finding is concerning, Vivian said, gathering the papers spread across the coffee table. The hiring algorithm is discriminatory. We're excluding qualified workers based on where they live, their age, their service records. We're using industry-standard practices to optimize workforce efficiency. Brent's voice carried an edge of warning. The board won't appreciate you undermining systems that took years to implement. Systems that are hurting our community, Vivian countered. Communities change. Business adapts. Brent stood, adjusting his cuffs. Look, I came here as a friend. Drop this audit now, before the board forces your hand. A soft knock interrupted them. Eli Carter stood in the doorway, manila folder in hand. "Mr. Carter?" Brent's smile returned, smooth as glass. "Perfect timing. Please join us." Eli entered cautiously, noting the tension in the room. "I have those employment gap statistics you requested, Ms. Hale." "Actually," Brent interjected, "I'd like a private word with Mr. Carter first. Vivian, would you mind?" Vivian hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Use the conference room next door. I'll wait here." The conference room was small and sterile, its wall of windows overlooking the darkening town. Brent gestured to a chair, but Eli remained standing. "Let's cut to the chase," Brent said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "You're a practical man, Mr. Carter, a father with responsibilities. This situation doesn't need to be complicated." He placed the envelope on the table between them. 6 months' salary, plus medical coverage for a year. All we ask is that you step away from the audit. Sign an NDA. Move on with your life. Eli stared at the envelope, thinking of Maya's insulin pump, the unpaid bills on his kitchen table. The offer was tempting, a quick solution to his immediate problems. "That's generous," Eli said quietly. "It's the smart play," Brent replied. "For everyone." Eli picked up the envelope, weighing it in his hand. Then he set it back down, unopened. "My daughter's 16, he said. Smart as they come, wants to be an artist. Every morning, she checks her blood sugar, adjusts her insulin, then sits at the kitchen table drawing while I make breakfast." He met Brent's gaze. "She watches everything I do, learns from every choice I make." "This choice could secure her future," Brent pressed. "No," Eli shook his head. "This choice would teach her that truth can be bought. That it's okay to look away when things are wrong, as long as the price is right." He pushed the envelope back across the table. "I can't afford that lesson." Brent's smile vanished. "Don't be foolish. You're one person against a billion-dollar system. What do you think you can accomplish?" "Don't know yet," Eli admitted. "But my daughter's watching. That's enough." He walked out, leaving Brent alone in the conference room. In the hallway, his phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How's it going, Dad?" The screen's glow illuminated his face as he stood there, thumb hovering over the keys, the weight of the evening's choice settling on his shoulders. The community center buzzed with energy as people filled the rows of folding chairs. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Maya sat next to her father, her sketchbook open on her lap, pencil moving swiftly across the page as she captured the scene. Eli tugged at his tie, the same one he'd worn to his last job interview. His weathered hands smoothed the familiar fabric as he watched more townspeople file in. Pastor Ruth directed latecomers to empty seats, while Lila Torres helped distribute printed handouts. Vivian Hale stood at the makeshift podium, looking different than she had that snowy night in the church basement. Her corporate armor had softened somehow. She wore a simple blazer over a sweater, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed her notes. "Thank you all for coming," Vivian began, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "The past few weeks have opened my eyes to some hard truths about how Hale Holdings has impacted this community." The room grew still. Eli felt Maya's hand slip into his. "Today, I'm announcing a new initiative." Vivian's voice grew stronger. "We're calling it the Second Shift Program. Starting next month, we'll be actively rehiring workers who were displaced by our previous policies, with a focus on veterans, older workers, and caregivers." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eli saw old Joe Martinez, a Vietnam vet who'd worked maintenance at the plant for 30 years, sit up straighter in his chair. "We're eliminating the automated scoring system that unfairly penalized applicants based on zip codes and employment gaps," Vivian continued. "Instead, we're implementing a community-based hiring approach that values experience, dedication, and local knowledge." Someone in the back started clapping. The applause spread like a wave. Additionally, Vivian raised her hand for quiet. "We're establishing a community tech lab in the Mills Annex, offering free training programs. And we're creating a medical stipend program to help bridge insurance gaps for our workers and their families." Maya's grip tightened on Eli's hand. He squeezed back, thinking of the insulin pump they couldn't afford. "To lead this initiative locally, we need someone who understands both the technical aspects of our operation and the heart of this community." Vivian's eyes found Eli in the crowd. "Mr. Carter, would you join me up here?" Eli felt Maya give him a gentle push. He stood, walked to the front of the room, conscious of every eye following him. "Eli Carter showed me what real leadership looks like," Vivian said. "He chose truth over easy answers. We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Second Shift Operations for Miller's Run. Full benefits, starting immediately." The room erupted in cheers. Eli saw Anna Reyes beaming from her seat, Lila wiping tears from her eyes. Even old Joe was on his feet, clapping. "Mr. Carter?" Vivian held out an envelope containing the formal offer letter. Eli took it, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you. I accept." More applause filled the room. Maya bounded up to hug him, her sketchbook falling forgotten to the floor. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "There's one more thing," Vivian said, touching Maya's shoulder. "I've expedited the approval for your medical equipment. The new insulin pump will be delivered next week, fully covered under the company's health plan." Maya's laugh was pure joy. She threw her arms around Vivian, catching the chairwoman by surprise. After a moment's hesitation, Vivian hugged her back. The meeting evolved into an impromptu celebration. People gathered in small groups, sharing coffee and hope-filled conversation. The church choir, who had come straight from practice, broke into an impromptu hymn. Their voices filled the community center with warm harmony. Eli watched Maya showing her sketches to Vivian, who seemed genuinely interested in each drawing. Pastor Ruth moved through the crowd with her ever-present coffee pot, topping off cups and sharing smiles. Lila and Anna sat with Joe Martinez, already planning training schedules for the tech lab. As the sun began to set, people slowly filtered out into the evening. Snow had begun to fall, fat flakes drifting lazily in the light of the street lamps. Eli and Maya walked home together, their footprints marking fresh paths in the dusting of white. "Can I put my art up in the tech lab?" Maya asked, hugging her sketchbook to her chest. "When it opens?" "I think that's a great idea," Eli said, watching his daughter's face glow with excitement. "Maybe you could teach some art classes there too." "Really?" Maya's eyes lit up. "You think they'd let me?" "Sure, it's going to be a place for everyone's talents." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, their breath creating small clouds in the cold air. "Dad?" Maya's voice was soft. "Are we really okay now?" Eli looked down at his daughter, remembering all the nights he'd lain awake, wondering how to keep their world from falling apart. The offer letter in his pocket felt like a talisman of possibility. "Yes, sweetie," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We're really okay." The snow continued to fall gently around them as they made their way home, each step feeling lighter than the last. For the first time in months, tomorrow looked brighter than yesterday. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when thunderous knocking jolted Eli from sleep. His heart raced as he stumbled down the stairs, still in his flannel pajama pants and gray t-shirt. The pounding continued, urgent and insistent. Through the frosted glass of his front door, he could make out Lila's familiar silhouette. She stood on his snow-dusted porch, clutching what looked like a newspaper in her mittened hand. Her face was tight with worry, her breath coming out in visible puffs in the cold morning air. "Eli, you need to see this." Lila thrust the newspaper at him as soon as he opened the door. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "Corporate whistleblower or data thief. Former employee accused of stealing proprietary information from Hale Holdings." His stomach dropped. Maya appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad, what's going on?" "Go back to your room, sweetheart," Eli managed, his voice steadier than he felt. He ushered Lila inside, away from the biting morning chill. In his small kitchen, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Eli spread the newspaper on the worn Formica table. His hands trembled slightly as he read the article. Anonymous sources claimed he had accessed confidential company servers without authorization, stealing sensitive data to force Hale Holdings into policy changes. The story painted him as a disgruntled ex-employee out for revenge. Lila pulled out her phone, showing him breaking news alerts. "It's everywhere, Eli. Social media, local news sites. They're saying Vivian's been suspended, pending a full investigation." The coffee maker gurgled in the background, a jarringly normal sound on this anything but normal morning. Eli's mind raced through the implications. The pilot program. Frozen. Maya's insulin pump? What would happen to the approval now? "This is garbage," Lila spat, jabbing her finger at the paper. "We followed every protocol. Anna helped us access those records legally." Before Eli could respond, car doors slammed outside. Through his kitchen window, he saw 3 news vans parking along his street, reporters and cameramen already bundling up against the cold. "Dad," Maya called from upstairs. "There are people with cameras outside." Eli's phone buzzed, messages flooding in from coworkers, church members, even old army buddies who'd seen the news. A text from Anna flashed across his screen. "Don't say anything to anyone, getting legal involved." The doorbell rang, followed by more knocking. Voices called through the door. "Mr. Carter, can we get a statement?" Lila peeked through the curtains. "Channel 4, Channel 7, and that business reporter who did the hit piece on the Union last year." She turned to Eli, her face grim. "This isn't random. Someone orchestrated this." Eli's hand clenched around his coffee mug. The warmth that had filled the community center yesterday, the hope, the celebration, felt like a distant dream. He thought of Vivian, probably dealing with her own media circus right now. Had she known this was coming? Had this all been an elaborate trap? More car doors slammed outside. The questions through the door grew louder, more insistent. Maya crept downstairs, her face pale. "The school just texted. They're asking if I need security to get to class because of reporters." Eli pulled his daughter close, feeling her trembling slightly against him. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd tried to build back up since losing his job, it was all unraveling in the harsh glare of accusation and suspicion. "We should call Pastor Ruth," Lila suggested, already dialing. "The church basement has a back entrance. We can get Maya to school without running that gauntlet." Through the window, Eli watched another news van park. Reporters huddled in small groups on his snow-covered lawn, their breath visible in the cold morning air as they talked into cameras. His small house, usually a sanctuary apiece, felt suddenly exposed and vulnerable. His phone buzzed again, a message from Vivian's assistant. The pilot program was officially on hold, all contracts frozen pending investigation. Please direct any questions to legal. Anger rose in Eli's chest, hot and heavy, mixing with a creeping dread that made his coffee taste like ashes in his mouth. He'd done everything by the book. He'd refused shortcuts, insisted on transparency, chosen truth over easy money. And now? "Dad?" Maya's voice was small. "What are we going to do?" Before he could answer, a corporate car pulled up, sleek and black, just like the one he'd pulled Vivian from during the blizzard. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase. Eli recognized him from yesterday's celebration, one of Hale Holdings' lawyers. Through his kitchen window, Eli watched the reporters swarm toward the lawyer like moths to a flame. Camera lights flicked on, microphones extended. The morning sun caught the frost on his window panes, creating little prisms of light that danced across his kitchen table, across the damning newspaper headlines, across Maya's worried face. The dread in his stomach grew heavier. Outside, the media circus continued, but all Eli could hear was the pounding of his own heart and the echo of Maya's unanswered question, "What are we going to do?" He watched another news van pull up, its satellite dish scraping ice from low-hanging branches. More reporters spilled out, more cameras, more questions shouted toward his door. The anger and fear in his chest twisted together, a knot of emotions he couldn't untangle. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd hoped to change, all of it balanced on a knife's edge now, threatening to collapse under the weight of these accusations. The reporters finally began drifting back to their vans as the morning wore on, presumably chasing other leads or angles to the story. Eli stood at his window, watching them drive away one by one, leaving behind trampled snow and tire tracks on his small lawn. The anger and dread remained, settling into his bones like the winter cold. The smear continued. The afternoon light was fading when Eli's phone buzzed. His heart sank as he recognized the number HR from Hale Holdings. The voice on the other end was clipped and formal, nothing like the warm conversation from just days ago when they'd discussed his new position. "Mr. Carter, in light of recent allegations, we regret to inform you that your employment offer has been rescinded, effective immediately." Eli gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, his knuckles white. "This is a mistake. Those allegations are false." "I'm sorry, sir. This decision is final." The line went dead. He barely had time to process this blow when his email pinged. A message from Sterling Associates, the vendor company behind the hiring algorithm. Legal terminology filled the screen, phrases like cease and desist and unauthorized access, jumping out at him. They threatened legal action if he didn't immediately retract his claims about their scoring system. Maya sat at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework but watching him with worried eyes. "Dad, what's wrong?" Before he could answer, his phone chimed again. This time it was the medical supply company. His stomach twisted as he read the message. Maya's insulin pump order had been canceled due to non-payment. The insurance approval had been tied to his new position at Hale. "It's okay, sweetie," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just some work stuff." But Maya was too perceptive. She got up and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest like she used to do when she was little. "I heard your phone calls. They took back your job, didn't they?" Eli hugged her tight, fighting back tears. "We'll figure something out. We always do." He spent the next hour trying to reach Vivian. Each call went straight to voicemail. Finally, an automated message informed him her number had been disconnected. He remembered what Lila had said earlier. The board had cut off all Vivian's communication channels pending investigation. Bills lay scattered across the kitchen table like fallen leaves. Mortgage, utilities, car payment, medical expenses. The regular ones were bad enough, but now legal fees loomed on the horizon. The vendor company's threat would require a lawyer, money he didn't have. Maya insisted on helping him sort through everything, despite his protests. She was too young to shoulder these burdens, but too stubborn to leave him alone. Together, they made stacks: urgent, can wait, and absolutely critical. The insulin pump receipt sat in the critical pile, a stark reminder of time running out. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first flakes of another snowstorm. The temperature dropped steadily as afternoon faded into evening. Eli kept the thermostat low to save on heating, and Maya pulled on one of her mother's old sweaters she'd kept. They heated up canned soup for dinner, neither very hungry. Maya tried to lighten the mood with her usual jokes, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was worried about more than just money. She hated seeing him defeated like this. By nightfall, the storm had intensified. Snow pelted the windows as Eli made his 15th attempt to reach someone who could help clear his name. Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open beside her, the page showing an unfinished drawing of the community center meeting where everything had seemed so promising just days ago. Eli sat in his armchair in the dark living room, watching the snow through the window. The streetlight cast long shadows across Maya's sleeping form. He pulled an old quilt over her, the same one he'd used to save Vivian during that first snowstorm. Everything had changed since that night, and now they were right back where they started, except this time, with even more to lose. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. In the dim light, Eli could make out the framed photo of his late wife on the mantel. She would know what to do. She always did. But she wasn't here, and Maya was counting on him to fix this somehow. The storm grew stronger, blanketing the world in white, as if trying to bury their troubles under its cold weight. But Eli knew better. When the snow melted, the problems would still be there, waiting to be faced. Pastor Ruth's boots crunched through the fresh snow as she made her way up Eli's narrow walkway early Sunday morning. The smell of freshly baked sourdough wafted from the covered basket in her arms, steam rising in the crisp winter air. She'd been baking since dawn, knowing bread could speak comfort when words fell short. She knocked gently on the door, noticing the empty driveway. Maya was probably still at her friend's house where she'd spent the night. The porch light flickered weakly above, casting shadows on untouched newspapers piled by the welcome mat. Eli opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usual neat appearance had given way to stubble and wrinkled clothes. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, making him appear older than his 52 years. "Pastor Ruth," he said, managing a tired smile, "you didn't have to come all this way." "Nonsense," she replied, holding up the basket. "Besides, this bread won't eat itself." She stepped inside as he moved aside, the warmth of the house a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The living room told its own story. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, legal documents, medical bills, and newspaper clippings about the scandal. An empty coffee mug sat beside his reading glasses, and his laptop showed an open spreadsheet full of numbers that didn't add up to hope. But what caught Ruth's attention was the piano in the corner. Its normally polished surface was dusty, and a for sale sign lay face down beside it. Her heart ached, knowing what that piano meant to him. "Sarah's piano," she said softly, setting the breadbasket on the kitchen counter. "You're thinking of selling it?" Eli's shoulders slumped as he poured them both coffee. "Maya's pump costs more than I have." The legal threats from Sterling Associates. He trailed off, stirring his coffee unnecessarily. "I'm running out of options, Ruth." Ruth accepted the coffee, but didn't drink immediately. Instead, she studied the man before her, the same man who'd spent countless hours helping others, who'd raised Maya alone after Sarah's passing, who'd never asked for help even when he needed it most. "You know, she said, breaking off a piece of warm bread. I remember when Sarah played this piano at church events. She always said music was truth set to melody. Eli touched the piano's smooth wood, his fingers tracing familiar patterns. Maya takes after her. She has her mother's eye for beauty. He picked up the for sale sign, turning it over in his hands. Sometimes I think I hear Sarah playing late at night. Silly, right? Not silly at all. Ruth set down her coffee. Eli, do you remember what I always say about truth? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Truth doesn't panic. Exactly. She reached across the table and took his hand. Truth doesn't need to rush. It doesn't need to sell precious memories in haste. Truth stands firm, like bedrock, while lies scurry around like mice in the walls. Eli's eyes drifted to the newspaper headlines about data theft and corporate espionage. But what if the truth gets buried? What if Brent's lies become the official story? Listen to me, Ruth said, her voice gentle but firm. I've known you since you were Maya's age, watching your mother sing in the choir. You've never run from truth, even when it cost you. That's why you filed that safety report. That's why you agreed to do the audit. Truth isn't just about facts, it's about character. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the piano. Eli walked over to it, running his hand along the polished wood. He lifted the lid, revealing the keys that had brought so much joy to their home. His fingers hovered over them, not quite touching. Sarah saved for 3 years to buy this piano, he said quietly. Taught lessons to neighborhood kids to make extra money. She'd say music feeds the soul like bread feeds the body. Ruth smiled, breaking off another piece of sourdough. Smart woman, you're Sarah. Maya sketches at this piano now, says it helps her think. Eli's voice caught slightly. How do I tell her I sold her mother's piano to pay for her medical care? Maybe you don't have to. Ruth stood up, brushing crumbs from her hands. Truth doesn't panic, remember? Give it time to work. The truth about Brent's lies will come out. Eli looked at her, hope warring with exhaustion in his eyes. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen truth win out before. This town has faced worse than Brent Klein and his corporate schemes. She patted the piano. This piano has probably heard more prayers than my church pews. Maybe it needs to hear one more. Eli slowly closed the piano lid, his movements careful and deliberate. Outside, the church bells began to toll, their deep resonance carrying across the snow-covered town. Each clear note seemed to echo Ruth's words. Truth doesn't panic. Truth doesn't panic. He picked up the for sale sign, but didn't move to put it back. Instead, he held it loosely, listening to the bells, their sound mixing with memories of Sarah's music and Maya's laughter. The last bell tone faded into silence, leaving the decision hanging in the air, unspoken but not yet made. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, the weekend's fresh snow glittering like diamonds under a bright winter sun. The church office was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the old radiator and the tick-tick-tick of Pastor Ruth's ancient wall clock. Eli sat at the scratched wooden table, surrounded by stacks of documents and his open laptop. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed another sleepless night. He'd been reviewing every email, every safety report, trying to piece together how Brent had twisted the truth. The office door burst open with such force that it bounced against the wall. Lila Torres strode in, her salt and pepper hair escaping from its usual neat bun, clutching a battered cardboard box. Found something, she announced, dropping the box onto the table with a thud that made Eli's coffee mug rattle. Her eyes were bright with triumph despite her disheveled appearance. Been digging through the union archives all weekend. These are meeting minutes going back 15 years. She pulled out folder after folder, yellowed papers filled with neat handwriting and official stamps. Look here, she said, pointing to a meeting from 2008. Sterling. Associates first showed up as a workforce optimization consultant back when Brent was just a regional manager. He championed their algorithm even then. Eli leaned forward, scanning the documents. They've been working together that long? Oh, it gets better, Lila said, pulling out more papers. 3 years later, Brent got promoted to CFO right after implementing their system company-wide. And look at this, their fees tripled that same quarter. The office door opened again, and Anna Reyes slipped in, carrying her laptop bag. Her HR badge was conspicuously absent, but her determination showed in every movement as she set up her computer. I managed to access the backup server, she said, her voice low even though they were alone. It never purges anything completely, company policy. The original audit logs are still there, with all the timestamps intact. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she pulled up file after file. See? Here's the actual timeline of when you access the hiring data, Eli. It matches perfectly with the authorized audit schedule. There's no evidence of any data theft because there wasn't any. Eli studied the screen, hope beginning to stir in his chest. Can you prove these records haven't been altered? Anna nodded. The server maintains an encrypted changelog. These files haven't been touched since they were created. Brent's evidence had to come from somewhere else. Speaking of Brent, Lila interjected, spreading out more union documents. Look at these meeting notes from last summer. He pushed hard for Sterling's new enhanced screening protocol right before the layoffs started, the one that just happened to flag older workers and people with employment gaps. The three of them worked through the morning, building their case piece by piece. Anna's technical expertise proved crucial in documenting the data trail, while Lila's union records revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices spanning years. Around noon, Eli's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "It's Vivian," he said, reading the message. "She's using a burner phone since they cut off her company line. Says she can be here in 2 hours. "Good," Lila said firmly, "because we've got enough here to blow this whole thing wide open." They cleared space on the table, organizing their evidence into clear, chronological order. Anna created a digital presentation, backing up everything to a secure cloud drive. Lila made fresh coffee, the rich aroma filling the small office as they waited. At exactly 2 o'clock, they heard footsteps on the church steps. Vivian Hale entered, looking both elegant and exhausted in a simple black sweater and slacks. Gone were her usual power suits and pearls. This was a woman ready for battle. "Show me everything," she said without preamble, taking the seat they offered. For the next hour, they laid out their case. Anna walked through the technical evidence proving Eli's innocence. Lila presented the historical pattern of Brent's relationship with Sterling Associates. The story emerged clearly: a years-long scheme to manipulate hiring practices while profiting from discriminatory algorithms. Vivian listened intently, taking detailed notes. When they finished, she looked up with steel in her eyes. "I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting here in Miller's Run, not at corporate headquarters. It's time everyone sees the truth for themselves." "When?" Eli asked. "Tomorrow morning. Most of the board members are already in town for the quarterly review. We'll use the church sanctuary. It's fitting that the truth comes out in a place dedicated to justice." She pulled out her phone, already composing messages. "Anna, can you have all this ready to present by 9 a.m.? Anna nodded firmly. "Everything's organized and backed up. I can project it right onto the sanctuary wall." "Lila, will you speak about the union records?" "Try and stop me," Lila said with a grim smile. "And Eli?" Vivian paused, meeting his eyes. "Are you ready to tell your story? The real story?" Eli thought of Maya, of all the other families affected by these decisions. "More than ready." Vivian stood, smoothing her sweater with steady hands. "Then let's end this." The three of them, former forklift operator, HR director, and union steward, reached across the table to shake hands. Sunlight streamed through the office's stained glass window, painting their joined hands in shades of gold and blue. The old wall clock ticked steadily onward, counting down the hours until truth would have its say. Evening shadows stretched across the church's stained glass windows, casting jeweled patterns on the worn wooden pews. The sanctuary hummed with nervous energy as people filed in, factory workers in their best flannels, shareholders in business attire, local reporters clutching notepads. Camera lights created bright islands in the gathering dusk. Maya sat in the front row beside Pastor Ruth, her hands fidgeting with her sketchbook. Eli stood near the side door, his tie feeling too tight despite Lila's expert adjustment. Anna worked quietly at her laptop, connected to the projector that would display their evidence on the large white wall behind the pulpit. The murmur of voices died down as Vivian Hale walked up the center aisle. She wore a simple navy dress, her silver hair caught in a modest twist. Gone was the polished corporate armor. This was a woman ready to speak truth in a house of truth. Brent Klein sat with the other board members, his usual smooth confidence showing cracks around the edges. Vivian reached the pulpit and adjusted the microphone. Her voice filled the sanctuary, strong and clear. "Good evening. We're here because serious allegations have been made about both the integrity of our hiring practices and the character of a good man." She looked directly at Eli. "Before we examine the evidence, I want to make something clear. I was wrong. A ripple went through the crowd. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I was wrong to let our company drift so far from its founding values. Wrong to prioritize algorithms over human dignity. Wrong to forget that every number in our spreadsheets represents a family, a future, a life. She gestured to Anna, who started her presentation. Crystal-clear timestamps and audit logs appeared on the wall, followed by Lila's meticulously organized union records. What you're seeing is the truth. Mr. Carter's audit was not only authorized but desperately needed. The data shows systematic discrimination against older workers, veterans, and caregivers, hidden behind the facade of efficiency metrics. Brent stood up, his face flushed. This is ridiculous. The vendor's system is industry standard. The vendor you've been privately connected to for 15 years? Vivian's voice cracked like ice. Please sit down, Mr. Klein. We have the meeting minutes. More documents appeared on the wall, years of backroom deals, inflated contracts, and carefully concealed connections between Brent and Sterling Associates. The evidence was devastating in its clarity. Based on these findings, I'm taking immediate action. Vivian squared her shoulders. First, Brent Klein is terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort him from the premises. 2 uniformed guards appeared at Brent's elbows. He looked around wildly, but found no allies among the board members who once laughed at his jokes. Second, our contract with Sterling Associates is canceled. Their discriminatory algorithm will never again decide someone's future in this town. Applause broke out, starting with the workers and spreading until it filled the sanctuary. Vivian raised her hand for quiet. Third, the second shift pilot program is not only reinstated but expanded. We will actively recruit veterans, older workers, and caregivers. Their experience and dedication are assets, not liabilities. She pulled a document from her folder. I'm establishing a binding, compassionate hiring charter, effective today. It mandates regular audits for age and racial bias, creates a community advisory board, and requires transparency in all hiring decisions. Maya grabbed her father's hand, squeezing tight. Finally, Vivian continued, Eli Carter is hereby fully exonerated of all accusations. Moreover, I'm appointing him director of second shift for Miller's Run, with full authority to implement these reforms. The applause this time was thunderous. Pastor Ruth wiped tears from her eyes as Lila hugged Anna, their months of careful work finally bearing fruit. One last thing. Vivian stepped away from the pulpit, walking to stand directly in front of Eli. I owe you a personal apology. You showed me mercy on that snowy road, even knowing who I was. You chose truth over easy money. You reminded me what leadership really means. She held out her hand. Thank you. Eli shook it firmly, his own eyes bright. Truth doesn't panic, he said softly, quoting Pastor Ruth. The board voted immediately to ratify all changes. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashed, and longtime workers embraced with joy. Through it all, the stained glass windows glowed with deepening twilight, as if the very church itself approved. Pastor Ruth made her way to the piano, her fingers finding the familiar keys. The choir stood, and soon the first notes of Amazing Grace floated through the sanctuary. Maya rushed to her father, throwing her arms around him as the music swelled. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Eli held his daughter close, feeling the weight of months of worry finally lifting from his shoulders. Around them, the entire congregation joined in the hymn, their voices rising to the rafters in a song of redemption and hope. Morning sunlight pierced through the mill's grimy windows, creating golden shafts in the dusty air. Eli's work boots echoed on the concrete floor as he led Vivian through the cavernous space. The old forklift bay, once filled with the rumble of engines and beeping of reverse signals, stood silent but full of possibility. This area here, Eli gestured to a wide section near the loading dock, gets the best natural light. We could set up the computer stations along that wall. Vivian nodded, making notes on her tablet. She traded her usual designer clothes for practical slacks and a sweater, looking more like the small-town girl she'd once been. What about the electrical? Will we need upgrades? Actually, Eli pulled out a folded paper from his jacket pocket. I had Anna check the building specs. The main power grid was updated 5 years ago. We just need to add some dedicated circuits for the computers. Their footsteps stirred up tiny dust motes that danced in the sunbeams. The space smelled of old metal and concrete, with hints of the machine oil that had soaked into the floors over decades. Look at this. Vivian ran her hand along a sturdy support beam. My grandfather installed these when they expanded in '62. He always said they'd outlast us all. Built to last, Eli agreed. Just needed the right purpose. A knock echoed through the space. They turned to see Lila standing in the doorway, flanked by a group of former mill workers. Joe Martinez still wore his old work jacket, the Hale logo faded but visible. Sarah Chen had her tool belt slung over her shoulder. "We heard you might need some help," Lila said, stepping forward. "These folks know every inch of this building." Vivian's eyes widened. "You'd want to help? After everything?" "This place is part of us," Joe said simply. "Besides, my granddaughter needs that computer training you're planning. Rather see it done right." Sarah was already examining the ceiling. "Those fluorescent fixtures should go. We need better lighting for screen work. I can rewire them." More people began filtering in through the loading dock. Electricians, painters, carpenters, all former employees, all volunteering their skills. They spread out through the space, pointing out what needed fixing, what could be saved. "The break room still got good bones," called out Pete Williams, who'd maintained the building's HVAC for 20 years. "Just needs a deep clean and fresh paint." Vivian watched them, clearly moved by their willingness to help. She turned to Eli. "I've been thinking. The corporate office in Chicago, it's too far removed from what matters." "Oh?" Eli was helping Sarah measure a wall for the computer stations. "I'm going to set up a local office, here in town, 2 days a week to start." She gestured toward the front of the building. "Maybe in that empty storefront by the diner." Eli paused his measuring. "That's a big change." "It's time for big changes." Vivian smiled, watching the impromptu work crew. Hard to understand what people need from the 42nd floor. The morning light strengthened, streaming through windows that were already being cleaned by volunteers on tall ladders. Someone had brought in a radio, and classic rock competed with the sound of planning discussions and tool bags being unpacked. "We could set up the forklift training simulator here." Eli pointed to a corner. "Keep some of the old skills alive alongside the new tech." "Perfect." Vivian made another note. "Integration, not replacement." More townspeople arrived, carrying coffee, carafes, and boxes of donuts. Pastor Ruth moved through the crowd, listening to ideas, offering encouragement. Maya sat cross-legged on a clean patch of floor, sketching the scene in her notebook. The energy in the space was transforming, from abandoned to alive, from past to future. Even the dust seemed different now, more like the residue of renewal than decay. "Look what I found in the office," called Lila, carefully carrying a framed photograph. It was the same vintage image of the mill's first integrated crew that the elder had shown Vivian at the potluck. "That should go right above the entrance to the lab," Vivian said firmly, "where everyone can see where we came from." Workers were already unloading supplies through the dock doors, paint cans in fresh colors, cleaning equipment, lumber for repairs. The morning sun climbed higher, pouring through freshly wiped windows, illuminating the stacked paint cans and tools that represented both restoration and reinvention. The space rang with purpose, measuring tapes, snapping, drills whirring, plans being discussed. Each person who walked in seemed to stand a little straighter, as if the simple act of rebuilding was itself restorative. Eli watched Vivian rolling up her sleeves to help move some old filing cabinets. She caught his eye and smiled, not the polished corporate smile he'd first seen, but something more genuine, more grounded. "We'll need a name for this place," she said, brushing dust from her hands. "Second Shift Tech Lab," Maya called out from her corner, not looking up from her sketch. "Because it's about second chances." The name settled into the space as naturally as the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long rays across the fresh paint cans that stood ready for tomorrow's work. 2 days later, weak winter sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows as Eli signed for the package. His hands trembled slightly as he set the plain brown box on the counter. Maya hovered nearby, her old insulin pump making its familiar clicking sound, a reminder of how desperately they needed this replacement. "It's really here," she whispered, running her fingers over the sealed edges of the box. Her dark hair fell forward, hiding the mix of relief and anxiety on her face. Eli pulled out his pocket knife, carefully slicing through the packing tape. "Let's see what we've got here, kiddo." Inside, nestled in protective foam, lay the new insulin pump, sleek, modern, and somehow both smaller and more sophisticated than Maya's old one. The device represented more than just medical equipment. It was security, independence, and normalcy wrapped in plastic and circuitry. "Look at that display," Maya said, lifting it gently from the box. "It's so clear." Her fingers traced the smooth edges with the careful attention she usually reserved for her sketching. Eli spread the instruction manual on the kitchen table, pulling up a chair. "Okay, let's do this right." He adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the setup procedures, while Maya unpacked the rest of the supplies: infusion sets, reservoirs, and adhesive patches. The afternoon light cast long shadows across their familiar kitchen as father and daughter worked together. Maya's old textbooks were stacked on one end of the table, her latest sketch, an unfinished drawing of the church during the blizzard, peeking out from beneath them. "Remember when we first learned how to do this?" Maya asked, measuring insulin into the new reservoir. Her hands moved with practiced confidence despite the different design. "I was so scared of doing it wrong." Eli smiled, remembering those early days after her diagnosis. "You were 10, but you handled it like a champ. Your mom would have been so proud of how well you manage everything." Maya paused, glancing at her father. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad, especially after everything that's happened." They worked methodically through the setup steps, double-checking each setting. The new pump had features her old one lacked: better tracking, easier adjustments, clearer alerts. Maya's eyes lit up as she explored the interface. "This is amazing," she said, scrolling through the menu options. "Look, it can even predict trends based on my readings." Eli watched her excitement with a warmth in his chest that pushed back against the memory of those desperate days when they weren't sure how they'd manage this. The sound of the old pump's last few clicks seemed to mark the passing of that uncertainty. "Ready to switch over?" he asked, laying out the alcohol swabs and new infusion set. Maya nodded, lifting her shirt to reveal the old pump site. With careful movements that spoke of years of practice, they removed the old equipment. The new infusion set went in smoothly, Maya barely wincing at the insertion. "Perfect placement," Eli said, helping her secure the adhesive patch. "How does it feel?" "Good. Different, but good." Maya attached the new pump to her waistband, adjusting it until it felt natural. "It's so light." The old pump lay silent on the table now, its faithful service ended. Maya picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "Kinda weird to say goodbye to it, you know? It got me through some tough times." "Maybe we should keep it," Eli suggested, "as a reminder of how far we've come." A knock at the door startled them both. Pastor Ruth stood on their porch, holding a small cake box from Miller's Bakery. "A little bird told me today was delivery day," she said, stepping into the kitchen. The smell of vanilla and almond wafted from the box. "You didn't have to," Eli started, but Pastor Ruth waved him off. "Nonsense. This is worth celebrating." She set the box on the counter and opened it to reveal a small round cake decorated with blue frosting flowers. "How's the new pump working?" Maya demonstrated the features, while Pastor Ruth nodded approvingly. Eli cut slices of cake, the familiar motions of hospitality feeling right on this milestone day. They gathered around the table, forks clinking against plates as they enjoyed the sweet treat. "To new beginnings," Pastor Ruth said, raising her fork in a playful toast. "And to answered prayers." The afternoon drifted into evening. Pastor Ruth headed home after helping clean up, leaving father and daughter to settle into their new routine. Maya sprawled on the couch with her sketchbook, occasionally glancing at the pump's display with a small smile. Eli moved around the kitchen, putting away dishes and wiping down counters. The rhythm of everyday tasks felt different somehow, lighter, more hopeful. He could hear the barely audible hum of the new pump working, a sound that would soon become as familiar as their heartbeats. Maya's pencil moved slower across the paper, her eyes growing heavy. The day's excitement and relief had worn her out. Eli watched as her head nodded forward, the sketchbook sliding onto her lap. The new pump continued its quiet work, delivering carefully measured doses of insulin while she slept. He gently removed the sketchbook, noting that she'd been drawing the pump, adding delicate details that made the medical device look almost beautiful. Pulling the old quilt from the back of the couch, he covered her carefully, tucking it around her shoulders. The new pump hummed softly in the quiet room, its small screen glowing with numbers that meant his daughter was safe, cared for, protected. Maya shifted slightly in her sleep, completely at ease with the device already, trusting it as naturally as she trusted him. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows of the mill's renovated annex, casting long rectangles of light across the polished concrete floor. Eli stood at the front of the spacious room, watching as people filtered in, some familiar faces, others new to him, but all part of Miller's Run's second shift program. Harold Jenkins, a Vietnam veteran with silver hair and steady hands, settled into a chair near the front. Behind him, Maria Rodriguez, a young mother of 3, arranged her notebook and pencils with careful precision. Tom Chin, recently retired from teaching high school physics, helped Sarah Williams, an Army reservist, adjust her desk to accommodate her leg brace. The room hummed with quiet conversation and the scraping of chair legs against concrete. 20 workstations filled the main area, each equipped with a gleaming monitor. Along one wall, a row of refurbished forklifts stood at attention, their yellow paint fresh and bright. "Good morning, everyone," Eli said, his voice carrying easily in the high-ceiling space. The conversations died down as faces turned toward him. "Welcome to day 1 of second shift." He paused, taking in the mix of anticipation and nervousness in their expressions. "Some of you I know from the old crew. Others are new to Hale Holdings. But everyone here has something valuable to bring to the table." Ana Reyes, who'd volunteered to help with the training, stepped forward with a stack of safety manuals. "We'll start with the basics today," she explained, passing out the materials. "Half of you will begin with forklift certification, while the other half starts computer training, then we'll switch after lunch." The group divided naturally. Those with previous warehouse experience gravitated toward the forklifts, while others moved to the computer stations. Lila Torres, now officially the program's safety coordinator, helped organize the forklift group into smaller teams. "Remember," Eli demonstrated as he climbed into the operator's seat, "always check your surroundings before starting. These machines deserve respect." He pointed out the safety features, his movements deliberate and clear. Harold nodded along, clearly familiar with the principles from his own work experience. Across the room, Jason Park, a local software developer who'd volunteered as an instructor, introduced the basics of coding to his group. Maria leaned forward, absorbing every word, as her fingers found their place on the keyboard. The gentle clicking of keys joined the mechanical hum of forklift engines. "Don't worry if it feels overwhelming at first," Jason assured them. "We're starting with the fundamentals. Today's just about getting comfortable with the environment." Tom Chin adjusted his glasses, his expression intent as he followed along with the tutorial on his screen. Mid-morning light filled the space as the group settled into their tasks. Sarah helped Harold navigate his first practice run with the forklift, her military training evident in her precise instructions. At the computers, Maria discovered she had a natural aptitude for coding logic, her face lighting up as she completed her first simple program. The atmosphere grew more relaxed as the morning progressed. People began sharing stories during brief breaks, tales of previous jobs, family life, military service. The sound of laughter mixed with the beeping of reversing forklifts and the soft whir of computer fan. "Watch your turning radius," Eli called out as Miguel Ramirez, a former construction worker, maneuvered through a practice course. "Remember, the back end swings wide." Miguel adjusted smoothly, demonstrating the kind of spatial awareness that made him a promising candidate. Near the computers, Lisa Chen, Tom's daughter, and another volunteer instructor helped troubleshoot a coding problem for James Foster, a former factory worker in his 50s. "See how the semicolon makes all the difference?" she explained patiently. James's face broke into a smile of understanding. The morning passed quickly, punctuated by small victories and steady progress. Each person found their rhythm, whether in the precise movements of forklift operation or the logical flow of basic programming. The initial nervousness had given way to focused determination. Eli moved between the groups, offering encouragement and assistance where needed. He noticed how naturally people helped each other, Harold explaining load balance to Sarah, Maria showing Tom a shortcut she discovered in the coding interface. This was more than just job training. It was community building itself anew. Just before lunch, Anna gathered everyone for a quick progress check. "You're all doing fantastic," she said, genuine pride in her voice. "This is exactly what second shift is about. Combining experience with new skills, supporting each other as we learn." The group responded with warm applause, a spontaneous expression of shared achievement. Even those who had arrived looking uncertain now stood straighter, more confident in their place within the program. As people began gathering their things for the lunch break, Eli noticed Vivian standing quietly in the doorway. She wore a simple blazer rather than her usual corporate attire, and her expression was soft as she watched the scene before her. Their eyes met across the room, and she gave him a small nod, acknowledgement of a vision becoming reality. The renovated space, once cold and empty, now pulsed with purpose. Sunlight caught the framed photographs on the wall, the historic image of the mill's first integrated crew alongside a new one of the second shift class. Diverse faces smiling with hope for the future. The room buzzed with conversation and movement as people headed out for lunch, their steps lighter than when they'd arrived that morning. Spring crept into Miller's Run with quiet persistence. Along the muddy banks of Miller Creek, patches of grass emerged from melting snow. Sunlight glinted off the old mill's windows, now cleaned and repaired, reflecting golden warmth across the parking lot where puddles replaced ice sheets. Eli pulled into his usual spot, noting the growing number of cars already there. The tech lab was set to officially open today, though informal training sessions had been running for weeks. He grabbed his thermos of coffee and made his way to the annex entrance, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Inside, the transformation took his breath away, as it did every morning. Gone were the dusty corners and abandoned equipment. The space breathed with new life. Rows of computers hummed softly, their screens casting a blue glow across polished concrete floors. The high windows let in streams of natural light, and the exposed brick walls had been cleaned to reveal their original warmth. Sarah Williams, the Army reservist who'd excelled in both forklift operation and basic coding, was already setting up for the day's first class. She moved with confidence now, her leg brace barely slowing her down as she arranged training materials on each desk. "Morning, Eli," she called out, straightening a monitor. "The high school group arrives in 30 minutes. Harold's bringing in some of his grandkids today." "Perfect," Eli replied, setting his thermos down at the instructor's station. "How's that new scheduling program coming along?" Sarah beamed. "Finished the beta version yesterday. It's already tracking maintenance schedules for all the forklifts. Tom Chen helped debug it. He's got a real knack for spotting errors." The door opened again, letting in a burst of fresh spring air. Maria Rodriguez entered, followed by her eldest daughter Sophia, now one of their regular team participants. They carried boxes of donuts, the local bakery's contribution to opening day. "The news crew's setting up outside," Maria reported, arranging the treats on a side table. "They want to interview some of our success stories." She smiled, adjusting her new employee badge. Hale Holdings had hired her full-time after she completed the program, impressed by her quick mastery of inventory management software. More people filtered in as 9 o'clock approached. Harold Jenkins arrived with 3 teenagers in tow, all wearing matching Future Tech t-shirts he'd ordered special for the occasion. Tom Chen set up the presentation computer, while Jason Park arranged handouts about the new coding curriculum. Lila Torres burst through the door, her arms full of local newspapers. "We made the front page," she announced, spreading them across an empty desk. The headline read, "Second Shift Success, Milltown Trains New Tech Force." Below it, a photo showed Sarah teaching a group of seniors about automated warehouse systems. "Channel 4 interviewed me yesterday," Harold said, helping himself to coffee. "Asked about going from forklifts to computers at my age." He chuckled. "Told them it's just like learning to drive a new kind of vehicle. Gotta respect the machine and pay attention to the rules." The first group of high school students arrived, filling the space with excited chatter. They paired up naturally with their mentors, former mill workers who now taught both practical skills and life lessons. Sofia Rodriguez helped a younger girl log into her workstation, showing the same patience her mother had demonstrated during their own training. Vivian Hale slipped in quietly through the side door, as she often did on training days. She'd kept her promise about working from town twice a week, maintaining a modest office down the street. Today, she wore casual clothes instead of her usual business attire, ready to join the hands-on sessions. "The board's quarterly review came in," she told Eli softly. "Employment numbers are up 15% since we implemented the charter. Retention rates nearly perfect." She watched as Harold demonstrated proper lifting technique to his grandson. They can't argue with results. The morning progressed smoothly. In one corner, Tom Chen led a robotics workshop, guiding students through basic programming concepts. Near the loading dock, Sarah supervised forklift certification practice. The space filled with the productive buzz of learning, keyboards clicking, voices explaining, questions being asked and answered. During the lunch break, local reporters interviewed several program graduates. Maria demonstrated the inventory system she'd helped develop. Harold proudly showed off his grandchildren's first computer game, a simple but functional creation. The cameras captured the easy interaction between generations, the natural flow of knowledge moving both ways. As the afternoon session wound down, Eli retrieved a carefully wrapped package from his office. The vintage photograph of the mill's first integrated crew had been professionally cleaned and reframed, its black and white clarity restored. He'd added a new brass plate beneath it, engraving reading, "People over perfect numbers, Miller Run's promise." The room gradually emptied as students and mentors headed home. Sunset painted the western windows orange, casting long shadows across the floor. Eli climbed the stepladder carefully, positioning the frame beside the lab entrance. The faces in the old photograph seemed to watch over the space, a reminder of both how far they'd come and how far they could still go. Sarah paused on her way out, studying the image. "My grandfather worked that crew," she said quietly. "He'd be proud to see this place now." She touched the frame gently before heading into the spring evening. Eli stepped back, observing how the last sunlight caught the glass. The photo hung straight and true, bridging past and present. Below it, tomorrow's class schedules were already posted, filled with names both familiar and new. Miller Run's future, taking shape one lesson at a time. The front doors swung open as a group of suited figures entered the tech lab, their polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. Vivian led the way, dressed in a simple navy blazer rather than her usual designer suits. She'd learned to adapt her style since spending more time in Miller's Run. "As you can see," she gestured to the bustling space, "we've maintained the building's industrial character while creating a modern learning environment." Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew she had something worth showing. The investors, 3 men and 2 women from various venture capital firms, moved through the space with careful expressions. Their eyes darted from the exposed brick walls to the neat rows of computer stations, taking mental notes. One of them, a silver-haired man named Douglas Wheeler, pulled out his phone to check stock prices. "Very quaint," he murmured, not bothering to look up. "But how does this translate to shareholder value?" Eli, who had been helping a veteran adjust his ergonomic keyboard settings, straightened up and walked over. He'd expected this reaction, had seen it before in corporate visitors who couldn't see past spreadsheets to the human potential right in front of them. "Mr. Wheeler," Vivian said, "I'd like you to meet Eli Carter, our Director of Second Shift Operations." Eli extended his hand, meeting Wheeler's hesitant handshake with a firm grip. "Why don't I introduce you to some of our trainees?" he suggested. "They can show you exactly how we're building value here." He led the group to where Sarah Williams was teaching a coding basics class. Her military bearing was evident as she stood to greet them, her leg brace barely visible beneath her pressed slacks. "Sarah completed our program last month," Eli explained. "She's already developed a maintenance tracking system that saved us thousands in equipment downtime." Sarah pulled up her program on the main screen, walking the investors through its clean interface and practical applications. Wheeler's phone disappeared into his pocket as he leaned in, asking detailed questions about implementation costs and scalability. Another investor, Janet Chen, drifted toward where Tom Chen, no relation, was mentoring a group of teenagers. The retired engineer had found new purpose teaching young people, and his students' enthusiasm was contagious. They were building simple robots, combining basic coding with mechanical skills. "This is impressive," Janet admitted, watching a girl successfully program her robot to navigate an obstacle course. "How many of your graduates have found employment?" 87% so far, Vivian answered, pride evident in her voice. "And not just with Hale Holdings. Other companies have started recruiting directly from our program." Maria Rodriguez approached with a tray of coffee, her new management trainee badge catching the morning light. "Would anyone like some?" Fresh from the local roastery. The youngest investor, Marcus Taylor, accepted a cup. "You worked here at the old mill?" he asked. 15 years on the floor," Maria nodded. "Now I'm learning supply chain software and training others. My daughter's in the youth program too." The investors spread out, engaging with more trainees and instructors. Wheeler lingered by Sarah's station, watching her debug code with a veteran who'd just started the program. Janet took notes while observing the robotics class. The atmosphere in the room shifted from skeptical observation to genuine interest. Over by the conference area, Marcus Taylor engaged in an animated discussion with Harold, one of the original mill workers, who now taught both traditional skills and basic computer literacy. Harold's grandchildren demonstrated their latest programming project, their eyes bright with excitement. "The multi-generational aspect is particularly compelling," Taylor commented to Vivian. "You're not just creating jobs, you're building a sustainable skills pipeline." Vivian nodded, watching the natural flow of knowledge and experience moving in all directions across the room. Young teaching old, Old teaching young, barriers of age and background dissolving in the face of shared purpose. Wheeler cleared his throat, drawing attention. "Ms. Hale, I've seen enough." His tone had lost its earlier dismissiveness. "My firm would be interested in discussing funding for program expansion, perhaps to other communities facing similar transitions." The other investors murmured agreement, already pulling out business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings. Janet Chin was particularly interested in the youth education component, while Marcus Taylor wanted to explore the technology integration aspect. As the group moved toward the exit, making plans for detailed proposals and future visits, Vivian caught Eli's eye and tilted her head toward the break room. Once the investors were gone, they slipped away from the bustling main space. The break room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the coffee maker. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming the small table where they sat. Eli poured coffee from his thermos into 2 mugs, his familiar routine now shared with an unlikely ally. "They get it now," he said simply, sliding 1 mug across to Vivian. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, a far cry from the expensive travel cups she'd once favored. "They do," she agreed. "Though I knew they would, once they saw it in action." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of learning and growth floating in from the main room. Through the window, they could see the last patches of snow melting away, making room for spring's new beginnings. The aroma of fried fish and fresh coleslaw filled the church basement. Paper plates dotted the long folding tables, and the cheerful buzz of conversation mixed with the clinking of plastic forks. Yellow light from aging fluorescent fixtures cast a warm glow over the gathered crowd, while handmade signs promoting the fundraiser decorated the cinder block walls. 8-year-old Tommy Jensen weaved between chairs with a paper airplane, followed closely by his sister Katie. Their mother called after them, but her words were lost in the happy din. At the serving station, volunteers in aprons ladled out portions of golden brown fish and handed out warm dinner rolls. Pastor Ruth moved through the room like a gentle breeze, touching shoulders here and there, making sure everyone had enough to eat. Her gray cardigan had a slight dusting of flour on one sleeve from helping in the kitchen earlier. She paused to help Mrs. Davidson, who was celebrating her 90th birthday, cut her fish into manageable pieces. The choir had gathered in one corner, their usual robes absent but their voices still strong, as they broke into an impromptu rendition of "This Little Light of Mine." Some diners joined in, creating pockets of song throughout the room. Children swayed in their seats, caught up in the rhythm. Eli stood near the kitchen door, his plate balanced on one hand as he chatted with Bob from the hardware store. His blue work shirt was fresh. He'd changed after finishing at the tech lab, and his eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as he laughed at something Bob said. Maya sat nearby, showing her latest sketches to a group of admiring church ladies. Vivian entered quietly through the side door, having changed from her office clothes into a simple sweater and slacks. She'd been doing that more lately, dressing to blend in rather than stand out. A few heads turned, but there were smiles now instead of the wary glances she'd received months ago. She made her way to the serving line, insisting on waiting her turn despite offers to move ahead. Pastor Ruth clinked a glass with a spoon, and the room gradually settled. "Before we serve dessert," she announced, "Eli has a few words to share with us." Eli set his plate down and walked to the front of the room. He wasn't one for public speaking, but his voice carried clear and steady. "You know, when I was a kid, my grandfather used to say that a town's strength isn't in its buildings or its businesses. It's in its people's hearts." He paused, looking around the room. "These past months have shown me just how right he was." He gestured to the gathered faces. "When the mill closed, we could have given up. When things got tough, we could have turned on each other. But instead, this community pulled together. We shared what we had. We helped where we could. And now?" His smile widened. "Now we're not just surviving. We're building something new." Heads nodded around the room. Sarah Williams, who'd just been promoted to lead instructor at the tech lab, wiped a tear from her cheek. Next to her, her teenage son squeezed her hand. "The second shift program isn't just about jobs," Eli continued. "It's about dignity. It's about believing in each other. Every person in this room has something to teach and something to learn." He glanced at Maya, who beamed back at him. "And that includes me." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Old Mr. Peterson, who'd worked at the mill for 40 years before retirement, thumped his cane approvingly on the floor. "So thank you," Eli said, his voice growing softer but no less powerful. Thank you for showing what real community looks like. Thank you for proving that when we stand together, there's no storm we can't weather." Applause broke out, warm and genuine. Someone in the back called out, "That's right." The choir spontaneously began humming Amazing Grace, the melody floating above the clapping. As Eli made his way back to his seat, people reached out to pat his shoulder or squeeze his arm. Maya hugged him quickly before darting off to help serve the apple pies that were being brought out from the kitchen. Across the room, Pastor Ruth and Vivian stood near the dessert table. The pastor's eyes twinkled as she looked at Vivian, who was watching the scene with visible emotion. A small, knowing smile passed between them. The kind of smile shared by people who have witnessed something precious and true. The room had transformed into a tableau of community in action. Elderly couples sharing slices of pie, teenagers helping to clear plates, young children being passed from lap to lap. Through the basement windows, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, its light touching everything with a gentle glow. The April morning sparkled with promise as Eli's truck rumbled into the parking lot at Miller's Run Park. Winter's grip had finally loosened, leaving behind puddles that reflected a cloudless sky. Maya had her sketchbook tucked under one arm as she hopped out of the passenger side, her insulin pump secure in its protective case at her hip. "Race you to our bench?" she challenged, already taking off down the worn path that curved around the duck pond. Eli smiled, taking his time to lock the truck. "Not fair, getting a head start," he called after her, but his heart warmed watching her run ahead. Her energy had returned full force since getting the new pump, and her recent blood sugar readings had all been steady. Their bench wasn't really theirs, of course, just a weathered wooden seat with a perfect view of both the pond and the rolling hills beyond. Maya had already claimed one end by the time Eli caught up, her pencil moving in quick strokes across a fresh page. "Capturing the geese?" Eli asked, settling beside her. A small flock paddled across the pond's surface, leaving gentle ripples in their wake. "Trying to get that one's attitude right?" Maya said, pointing to a particularly haughty-looking goose that held its head high. "He reminds me of Mr. Peterson when someone suggests changing his filing system at the lab." Eli chuckled. The retired accountant who volunteered at second shift was set in his ways, but his patience with the younger trainees had proven invaluable. "Speaking of the lab, Ms. Rodriguez tells me you've been helping some of the students with their design projects after school." Maya nodded, adding shading to her sketch. "They're working on logos for their mock businesses. Most of them have great ideas, but need help making them look professional." She paused, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Actually, I was thinking, maybe I could study graphic design in college?" The word college no longer sent a spike of anxiety through Eli's chest like it had during the worst months after the layoff. The second shift director position came with solid benefits and a salary that let him start rebuilding their savings. More importantly, it gave him back his sense of purpose. "You've got a real gift for it," he said, watching a pair of sparrows hop along the path. "And the portfolio you're building helping at the lab will look great on applications." "Mrs. Chen said the same thing," Maya replied, referring to her art teacher. "She thinks I could get scholarships, especially with my grades and extracurriculars." She closed her sketchbook and turned to face her father. "Would Mom have been okay with me not becoming a doctor?" Eli's throat tightened for a moment. "Your mom would have been proud of you following your passion," he said softly. "She always said the world needs all kinds of healers. Some heal bodies, some heal spirits, and some heal through creating beauty." Maya leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that reminded him she was still his little girl, despite her growing independence. "What about you, Dad? Are you happy with how things turned out?" Eli considered the question, watching the morning sunlight dance on the pond's surface. The past year had been a roller coaster of crisis and redemption, fear and hope. But now, second shift was thriving. The first cohort had graduated, many already employed or starting their own businesses. 3 other Hale facilities had adopted the program, with more in talks to follow. "I'm more than happy," he said finally. "I'm grateful. We're helping people rebuild their lives, giving them back their dignity, and watching you bloom through all of it." He squeezed her shoulder. "You make me proud every day, kiddo." "Even when I steal the last cookie?" she teased. "Especially then. Shows initiative." They shared a laugh, comfortable in the spring warmth. A jogger passed by, waving hello, one of their recent graduates who'd found work as a personal trainer. The lab's coding classes had helped her build a website for her new business. "I was thinking," Eli said, about expanding the art therapy program at second shift. Having you help with the logos showed me how much creative work matters in healing. Maybe we could partner with the community college, offer some basic design courses? Maya's eyes lit up. Could I help? I mean, once I learn more myself? I'm counting on it. The program needs people who understand both the technical skills and the human side. He gestured to her sketchbook. You've got both. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the park come alive around them. A young mother pushed a stroller past, her toddler pointing excitedly at the ducks. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the shore, pausing to toss breadcrumbs to the waiting waterfowl. Maya opened her sketchbook again, adding final touches to her goose portrait. You know what's weird? She said, not looking up from her work. I used to be scared all the time, about money, about my pump, about you being so worried. But now, she shrugged. I still have diabetes, we're not rich, and stuff still goes wrong sometimes. But I'm not scared anymore. Eli nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They had built something stronger than mere stability. They had built resilience, community, purpose. A shadow passed overhead, drawing their attention skyward. A V formation of geese cut across the blue expanse, their calls carrying clearly in the morning air. Maya raised her pencil, quickly capturing their silhouettes in the corner of her page. Heading north, Eli observed. Seasons changing. Maya nodded, her pencil still moving. Change can be good, she said simply. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Miller's Run First Methodist, painting rainbow patterns across the packed pews. The old church hadn't seen a crowd like this since Christmas Eve service. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the vestibule. The wooden floors creaked softly under the weight of so many gathered souls. Eli Carter stood near the altar, straightening his tie for the 10th time. His dark suit still felt a bit stiff. He hadn't worn it since the layoffs began, but Maya had insisted on ironing it perfectly for today's dedication. She sat in the front row now, beaming up at him, her sketchpad balanced on her knee as always. Pastor Ruth stepped to the podium, her silver hair catching the morning light. Welcome, everyone, to this special dedication service, she began, her voice warm and steady. When we opened our doors during that terrible blizzard months ago, none of us could have imagined the spring that would follow winter's trials. Eli's gaze drifted to Vivian Hale, seated beside Maya. Gone was the expensive suit she'd worn the day he'd pulled her from the snowdrift. Today she wore a simple blue dress, a handmade scarf from the church quilting circle draped around her shoulders. She caught his eye and gave a small nod. The choir rose, their voices lifting in amazing grace. Among them stood several second-shift trainees, former mill workers beside teenagers learning coding, their voices blending in perfect harmony. Eli noticed Mrs. Rodriguez, who taught the advanced programming classes, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When the last note faded, Pastor Ruth gestured to Eli. And now, the director of our second shift program will read from the charter that has already begun changing lives in Miller's Run. Eli's footsteps echoed as he approached the podium. The familiar faces before him told stories of transformation. Tom Wheeler, who'd worked the mill for 30 years, now teaching forklift certification to a new generation. Ana Reyes, who'd risked her career to expose the truth, leading HR workshops on ethical hiring. Lila Torres, recently elected to the town council, her union notebook replaced by a tablet computer. He unfolded the charter, though he knew the words by heart. The paper still bore coffee stains from late nights, drafting it with Vivian in the church basement. People over perfect numbers. He read, his voice clear and strong. This program exists to restore dignity through opportunity, to measure success not in algorithms but in lives changed, and to ensure that every person who seeks honest work finds not just a job, but a path forward. Applause rose like thunder, echoing off the high ceiling. Maya whistled through her fingers, making several people laugh. Eli waited for the sound to settle before continuing with the practical points. Training schedules, mentorship programs, educational partnerships. But his eyes kept returning to the two-frame photographs, now hanging beside the altar. The first showed that pioneering integrated crew from decades past, their faces proud despite the prejudices they'd faced. Beside it hung the new image, taken just yesterday. The current second shift class, spanning ages from 16 to 72. Every background represented. In both photos, the same determined hope shone in their eyes. Pastor Ruth returned to the podium as Eli finished. Before we close with our dedication hymn, I'd like to share something. That blizzard night, when Eli brought Vivian in from the storm, I worried our town's pain might turn to bitterness. Instead, you chose grace. You chose to build rather than blame. And now look, the mill that once divided us has become a place of healing. The choir director raised her hands, and the first notes of "How Can I Keep From Singing" rose sweet and clear. Eli returned to his seat as the congregation joined in, their voices filling every corner of the sanctuary. Through the windows, he could see the river flowing free of ice, its waters catching the spring sunlight. Maya slipped her hand into his as they sang. Her insulin pump beeped softly, a routine check, nothing to worry about now. Across the aisle, old Mr. Peterson helped one of his young coding students find the right page in the hymnal. Vivian's voice carried the harmony, no longer a stranger, but part of the town's chorus. The music swelled, lifting up through the rafters like a prayer of thanksgiving. Outside, the last patches of snow had melted from the riverbank, leaving behind soil ready for new growth. The long winter had passed, and Miller's Run was thawing into something beautiful. As the final verse began, sunlight broke through a cloud, illuminating the two photographs. Past and present, pain and healing, all held in the same gentle light. The choir's voices soared, carrying hope as natural and unstoppable as springtime, settling over the gathered community like a benediction. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.